series on supporting the Thank you, Josie, for beginning that recording. We are so excited to be doing part 2, as I was saying, for supporting the executive function of autistic students in the classroom. We do encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know your name, your role, where you're joining us from. If you have any technical issues during the session, please let us know in the chat and someone from our team will assist you. Also, if there are any resources that you would like to share during the course of our session, you can do that in the chat. And if you have a question for our presenter, feel free to put that in the chat as well. During the course of our presentation, we will share a link to a very brief survey in the chat. This survey is required by our funder and allows us to continue our work. It only takes a few moments to complete. It does have 2 parts, and I'd like to highlight that after completion of the second part, you will have access to a certificate of attendance for today's session. Before we get into the session, we have a quick disclaimer. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Today's session is brought to you by the Southeast Mental Health Technology Transfer Center School Mental Health Initiative. We are located in Atlanta, Georgia at Emory University, Rollins School of Public Health. We are proud to represent the 8 states in HHS Region 4, which you can see pictured here. Our center includes faculty and staff with expertise in public health programs, finance, policy, and health systems, which give us a unique lens through which we can address the mental health priorities in our region. And the goal of our center is to accelerate the adoption of evidence-based mental health programs and practices by providing training and technical assistance to Region 4. And now I'm very happy to introduce our presenter, Dr. Catherine Picard. Dr. Picard is an assistant professor at the Emory University School of Medicine and at the Marcus Autism Center. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from Michigan State University and completed a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at JFK Partners at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Her primary research interest is in the translation of evidence-based treatments into community systems that are naturally positioned to serve autistic children and children with other disabilities. Clinically, Dr. Picard is a psychologist with a strong background of supporting autistic individuals across the lifespan. She holds specific expertise in parent-mediated intervention for young children, as well as in cognitive behavioral therapy for autistic youth who have co-occurring anxiety. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Picard.
Thanks so much, Kelly, and thanks everyone for being here this afternoon. It's great to see some familiar faces, and I appreciate you introducing yourself in the chat box. I see people from all over. I saw someone from Colorado, which is where I used to be, so welcome. Before we get started, if you've attended a presentation with us recently, you've seen this disclaimer, but we just like to let folks know that in our presentations, we often use identity first language, and we use that for a few different reasons. We use it in response to the neurodiversity movement based on preferences of many autistic adults, and in order to avoid the use of ableist language, but we recognize that folks have many different preferences. But without further ado, we're going to get rolling. There's a lot to cover today. We just want to give a plug that this webinar series is part of a broader emphasis that the Southeastern SEMHTTC has had the past 2 years, and that is on supporting the mental health of autistic students. And so on our homepage, you'll be able to access a toolkit that compiles all of the different resources that have been put together over the past couple of years. And so if you haven't checked that out, we just encourage you to do that. This is the second part of a 2-part office hours series. 2 weeks ago, the emphasis of the office hours was on identifying executive function differences amongst autistic students. And so if you were not able to attend that office hour, the link to the recording was just dropped in the chat box. But today, the focus is now on Well, if you suspect, right, that one or more of your students has executive function differences, what are some of the evidence-based approaches and strategies that could be used to support them? And so the specific objectives for today are to describe evidence-based approaches and strategies to support executive functioning in autistic adults, and then to identify some of those strategies within the context of 2 case studies, right? So the goal of this type of webinar is to provide less didactic and to be as applied as you can within a 1-hour kind of Zoom structure. So we'll be giving a brief overview of some of these strategies and then moving into some case examples, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I know that many of you are introducing yourself in the chat box, but it's still helpful to know who you are. And so we do have a poll that's designed to just give me some more context on your professional role, how much of your professional time you spend working with autistic students, how much time you spend working with supporting the mental health of autistic students, and then even more specifically on the executive function of students. And so if you have a second to fill this out, that would be super helpful for us in just understanding who's here today. Thanks so much. And Kelly, I am not sure, I might have to be host or co-host in order to see the responses come in. I might already be, but awesome. Thanks. Wonderful. So I see folks filling it out. Just take maybe one more minute and then I'll give my best summary of who's here today. And again, this is helpful just for me to have some background in terms of how much detail I should give in certain areas. Awesome. Okay, so looks like all of our webinars thus far, we have a really awesome mix of different providers, both with mental health and special ed backgrounds. I love that we have some BCBAs and administrators on as well. And it looks like, again, we have a good mix of people who are working with autistic students and those where that may not be their primary role. And then when it comes to kind of the mental health and executive function of autistic students, again, kind of varied levels of experience. And the goal of this webinar is to really, honor that varied experience. It's really meant to give a snapshot of strategies and then to help you apply those strategies to students who are on your caseload. So to get started today, I think it's important to just give a little bit of a background on why the heck we're even talking about executive function in the first place. We know, and again, you may have seen this slide before, but we know that autistic individuals are much more likely to develop mental health challenges than non-autistic individuals, and for lots of reasons. And some of our previous content and webinars have talked about this and why that might be the case. But one of the things you can see, my clicker will go, is that one of the most common co-occurring mental health challenges in autistic individuals is ADHD, which is often marked by executive function challenges. And so we know that autistic students are much more likely to have executive function differences, and these differences really show up in school. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. All right, so what is executive function? If you attended one of our previous webinars, you may have seen this slide, and it really describes executive function as a set of cognitive control processes. And so these processes enable self-regulation and self-directed behavior towards, sorry, my chat box is blocking the quote, toward a goal, which allows us to break habits, make decisions, and evaluate risks, plan for the future, prioritize what we do, and cope with novel situations. So a whole lot of things, right? And things that are really important within the context of schools for kids. So we really want to be sure that we're thinking carefully about executive function, and at the same time, acknowledging that it is an umbrella term that includes a lot of different things. It's complicated, right? When someone says I work with a kid who has an executive function difference, that it can be hard to really understand what that means. And so we want to be specific, both in understanding what those differences are, so that way we can effectively support those students. So what do we mean? Like, when we say executive function, what are some of those core areas that we often think about? We think about a number of things. The first is, I'm going to start with the top right corner, which is cognitive shifting. And the simple way of saying this is flexibility. So this is really our ability to shift our attention and to kind of change perspectives in response to things that are going on in our environment. Working memory is the ability to hold and manipulate information. We also have planning skills, which is the ability to formulate a plan and execute it. And then inhibition, which is oftentimes, given the structure of schools, very important, which is the ability to resist a temptation in order to follow a set of rules that are in place. So we focus on these 4 areas. I will say that the presentation today also hones in on emotion regulation, which is often not thought of as a super core component of executive function, but is very related, right? In order for us to regulate our emotion, that does require kind of higher level cognitive processes. So why it matters, I think you're probably here because you know some of these things, but executive function skills are linked to all sorts of important outcomes, both for kids with autism and kids who are not autistic. And so executive function skills help with theory of mind. And so that's our ability to really navigate our social world and understand the thoughts and feelings and perspectives of others. It impacts our adaptive skills. Those are like our life skills. Things like, being able to keep all of our belongings together, get dressed, prep a meal, and make sure we can do all of the activities that are necessary for us to carry out our daily lives. It certainly impacts school readiness, right? And I think that's part of the reason we're really focusing in on this topic for kids, because it shows up a whole lot in schools, and it impacts our mental health too, often because it impacts our ability to regulate our emotions. When we think about strategies to support executive function in autistic kids, it's important to know that many of them are skills-based. And so when we say skills-based programs, what that means is that many of the programs that are targeting executive function include specific ways of teaching, right, that are listed on this slide. So that includes providing students with didactic information that includes visual support. So it might introduce a concept and tie a visual to it to help students understand it. There are often hands-on activities and worksheets, video modeling, so students actually get to see what it looks like to use a specific skill, role play and practice, actually taking that skill and putting it into action and getting feedback, and then a plan to translate it to other settings, right? We all know it's one thing to practice a strategy in maybe a clinical space or in a school setting. It's a whole other ballgame to then use that skill in other environments, whether that be in the home or in other community activities. The presentation today is not going to talk about the strategies that we use to teach the content, right? But we're going to focus on the strategies themselves, right? And what they are and what we want to help students learn. It's important to know that the strategies that I'm going to be talking about today are many of them are pulled from executive function curriculums. These are not strategies that I myself pulled out of thin air, right? These are things that exist and that have been shown to have some evidence base for autistic kids. All right, so what are these strategies? Like I mentioned, we're going to hone in on a few different executive function areas and talk about high-level strategies that can be used to support kids in these areas. We'll then be taking the content that we talk about and applying it to a case, 2 cases actually. So we're going to start off with strategies that support students in being more flexible. And these are really, again, important strategies. But what we're going to be doing is, teaching students terminology that helps them consider multiple perspectives and to handle change. Again, we're going to teach the strategies via actually giving them the terminology, helping them see what the strategy looks like, helping them apply the strategy, and then coming up with that plan to help them practice. So the strategies themselves, and these are, again, terms that I have pulled in this case from a curriculum called Unstuck and on Target, which was developed for to support the executive function of students. And so this is terminology like plan A and plan B. How do we have a backup plan when we really wanted to go, I don't know, to recess, but it's raining and we can't go to recess, right? Or go play on the playground. How to compromise, right? How do we find middle ground with peers so that way we're not so stuck on one specific solution? How do we kind of come to the middle and see other perspectives? And we can teach them concepts like big deal and little deal, right? To help us understand, well, even though this situation kind of emotionally is hard, let's take a step back from it and think through the extent to which it really kind of impacts larger things. And then something that's very hard, I don't know that anyone really does this well, which is how do we kind of expect and handle the unexpected, and to give students some kind of strategies for when those things start to unfold. So these are some of the concepts that we would want to be teaching students, and the specific methods by which we teach them are going to include many different things, right? Including, didactic, video review, role play, and kind of generalization strategies. You'll see in this presentation, and this is, hopefully something that is a theme throughout the work that we do, is that we want to be thinking about the fact that many of our autistic students are in environments that were not set up for them, and that are not, conducive to their learning styles. And so we do need to be really considerate and thoughtful about what it is going to take for us to create spaces that are more conducive to the learning styles and preferences of autistic kids. And so things that come to mind for me when I think about flexibility, I think about things like, what's in it for the student, right? We want to be thinking about, like, why will we be flexible? What actually is there to gain? Being flexible does not always feel good. And so what is the end goal, and how might this actually benefit students in the long run? So again, we're going to think about what are the benefits also of being inflexible. I think that oftentimes there is, again, a lot of emphasis on helping students come to the middle and compromise and be less rigid, but there are also benefits of holding your ground, right? And having strong opinions. And I think we want to be extremely thoughtful in the messaging that we are giving students, which is not that you just need to be more flexible, but hey, let's figure out when it is okay to kind of stand up for yourself and advocate for what you want, and when might it be a good time to come to the middle. And then finally, and I think this is extremely important for our autistic kids and kids with other developmental delays and disabilities, which is that when is flexible too flexible, right? If we're preaching the message that you just need to be more and more flexible, right? We may run the risk, right, of kind of sending a message that students, again, always need to compromise, always need to come to a middle ground with peers, and that may make them kind of at greater risk to kind of being taken advantage of. So we really want to make sure that we're supporting students and figuring out, when do I be flexible? What's in it for me? And then when are the times when I can stick up for myself, and how do I do that thoughtfully? We're going to shift over to talking about planning. And planning, like we've talked about before, is extremely important for kids to be able to achieve long-term goals. And it is complicated, right? I mean, I think probably for anyone on this call, we have lots of goals, and it can be hard to figure out the best way to get to them. And so really, we want to be teaching students a process, right, that is generalizable across many goals that they may have. And so the goal of activities like these is, again, to help students learn a process to create a goal, to generate the steps to achieving the goal, and to monitor progress towards the goal. And so a framework that I, again, like that is used in other curriculums is this goal, plan, do, check model, which essentially helps students, again, select a goal that's important to them, draft a plan of the steps to achieve that goal, work their way through the steps, and then evaluate their success towards that goal. And we're going to talk on the next slide about some of the nuances of an activity like this, because, there are obviously tons of things to think about, and it's often not that straightforward. All right, so what might be important to think about when doing activities like this with students? It's first important to potentially help students understand that you may need multiple plans to achieve the same goal, right? And so this kind of dovetails back to our conversation around flexibility. We want students to be curious and to generate lots of possible ideas about how one could go about achieving a goal. There often are many paths to achieve the same outcomes. And so activities like this can really help kids also reflect on and work on some of those flexibility skills. And then I think importantly, we want to be thinking about, what are the skills or supports that might need to be in place to help students achieve their goals, right? So oftentimes, right, it's like, okay, well, this is all on the student, right? They have the goal to be, student of the month, right? And like, it's kind of on them. But we also want to, as teachers and educators, be thinking about, well, how can I make changes to my environment and to the processes that I have to support the student in achieving that goal? And truly, are there skills that we might want to help students with, right? If they have a goal to, for example, be more vocal in class, right? Or raise their hand more, or get better, a better participation grade, we want to be thinking through, well, what is the best way for them to advocate for themselves and raise their hand in class? And, have they done it before and been made fun of by peers, right? Is there something about the class environment that we could do to set them up to be more successful in achieving this goal? And then we have two more areas to talk about before we move into our case studies. The third area is inhibition. And so again, this is the ability for students to kind of hold back or not act immediately on their impulses, and to inhibit themselves because they want to achieve a goal, or because there are some rules that are in place that need to be followed. And so I think a thing that we often see across lots of folks, educators, providers, parents, ourselves, is that we have a tendency to provide students feedback after a problem arises, right? So after a student has left their seat, they're reprimanded and told to go back to their seat, right? After a student blurts out the answer, they're then told that they need to raise their hand next time. And so instead, we really want to be thinking about what are the more proactive ways to help the student do what is expected instead of being reprimanded for not doing what is expected. And so as part of these, there are so many ways you could go about teaching and working on this with students, but we want to set up role play and expectations for the student around what is the best thing to do in this situation. Let's practice it ahead of time. Are there visual supports that need to be put in place to help remind the student about those expectations? And are there ways to reinforce and really support the student for doing the right thing, and not just kind of consistently calling out the things that are not meeting expectations? Again, I think outside of kind of, teaching the student what is expected, right? Using visual supports, role playing, and setting up, reward systems for kind of following those expectations. It's also important to think through, right? What are rules that are absolutely necessary for the student to follow, and what is allowable, right? How often really does a kiddo need to be in their seat, right? Like what are there things, right, that like, are there rules in place that maybe could be flexed to be more supportive of students, especially our neurodiverse learners who, may kind of have different learning styles? And are there environmental changes that can be made to support the students? We've already talked about visual supports, but are there things that we can do that allow students to be more active in the classroom, that allow them to get up and move, or that make the environment more comfortable for them to be in? And there are two little examples on this slide here. right? And so we can consider both of them. Maybe there is a student who gets out of their seat and walks around, right? And it's thinking through, again, when is that okay to do, right? And there may actually be times when it is okay to do if it's not disrupting others. Or maybe that student is in a location in the class where it is okay, right? They're towards the back of the class and there is more room to get up and move. How can we, again, set them up for success? And same thing, when if a student is talking to their peers while the teacher is talking or blurting out answers, the question is, how do we kind of help them set them up for success so that this happens less, right? Maybe it's different seating arrangement, right? Maybe it's visual supports to kind of help them. And maybe it's coming up with clear classroom guidelines around when chit chat is allowed and when it's not. And then I want to talk, I in our last webinar that we had 2 weeks ago, at the very end, we had a poll, and the poll basically said, like, what are topics that are of most interest to you in learning strategies for? And emotion regulation was by far and away the topic that was most often endorsed as people wanting more information on. And I completely agree. And so I think that we're going to talk through a few high-level strategies to support students who have emotion regulation challenges, but we saw that poll and recognize that that's a topic that could be talked about in great detail. So I think, again, one of the things, no different than any student you're working with, when you're teaching emotion regulation, we're talking about helping students manage big emotions, right? Those could be big upset emotions. They could be big anxious emotions. They could be big happy emotions. And these are hard things, right? Like, even as adults, we don't do this all that well. And I think the first thing we have to recognize is this is a learning process for everyone. We all, over time, learn more effective ways to regulate ourselves. But one of the things that I have found particularly useful in working with students in this area is that we need, as always, buy-in, right? Students are used to being reprimanded for big emotions or just told, just take a deep breath, right? When they're like in the yellow or red zone, right? And so over time, you see that kids get burnt out on talking about emotion regulation. And so we want to think through, like, what is the best way to get buy-in for them? And maybe it's that, right? We want kids to have more fun, right? A kid wants to spend more time at recess with their friends. And because their emotions are so big, like, it's hard to do that, right? And so we're trying to think through, how can we help kids have more fun and do more things that they enjoy? That's the whole point of doing any emotion regulation work. We have to use consistent terminology and practice, not just when kids are upset, right? Because then kids associate strategies with, I only use these things when I'm mad and I don't like them because, right, I only use them when I'm mad or upset. So the main components of teaching emotion regulation, and again, we recognize that they're, like all of these strategies, there's a lot to unpack. But the main components that we often think about are, first, psychoeducation. So really giving kids information on what their emotions are and what their emotions are, how it feels to experience a variety of emotions, and the situations that kind of are likely to make us feel those different emotions. That baseline is really helpful because then what it allows us to do is practice relaxation strategies. And these are strategies that help students manage their big physiological sensations, things like deep breathing, taking a walk, getting a drink of water. They could be sensory strategies too, right? They could be things like, going to a darker space, wearing headphones, whatever it might be. The whole point is, like, they're just things that we do to regulate our bodies. And we want to, again, help students practice them, not just when they're upset, but also when they're in the green zone and feeling okay. Because, I often give the analogy, right? Like, and this is, just the first of many, one of many analogies that you could use, but like, for basketball players, right, they practice free throws like all the time in practice because it's really hard to, and a lot of pressure to shoot a free throw during a big game, right? And so we want kids to really understand and know these strategies and be confident using them, so that way they're more likely to be able to use them when they're having a harder time. And then finally, we want to help students use cognitive strategies, and these are the strategies that help them manage their worrisome thoughts. Yeah, I have been doing my best to monitor the chat, and Alyssa, your question is like so well timed that I'm gonna address it. And she is asking, what if kids are unaware of the situations that bring about their emotions? How do we help them build awareness other than just telling them what is noticed, right? Yeah, you kind of run into like a power struggle where they're like, I never get upset. And then you're like, well, I just saw you get upset. And you want to maintain your rapport as their educator, teacher, provider. So I think there are many ways to go about this. One is like you want to avoid power struggles. And so I think you can obviously, say like, this is what I notice you feeling, or you can say, okay, fine. Yeah. We're going to spend less time debating, right? The situations that cause you to experience emotions. And we're just going to talk about the fact that like, maybe what's in it for the student is they want to have more fun, right? We want to kind of think back, like, what are the students' goals, right? Do they want to have more fun? Do they want to feel better? Do they want to spend less time in the principal's office? Like what's in it? What's in it for them? And then to kind of take that motivation and really hone into, okay, well, let's just practice strategies, right? Let's start to dive in and think through, okay, what are the things that are going to help you feel good, right? Because those sometimes are the same strategies that are going to help us regulate when they're in the yellow zone too. But what I would say to that is to try and avoid power struggles. You can certainly tell kids, what you notice, but I think at the end of the day, we just want to know what's in it for them and to help them practice strategies and see the impact that it has. What I am going to do, I'm just looking at time right now. I feel like time inevitably flies in webinars like this. Again, we want to say that the purpose of the webinar today is to kind of give these high-level strategies and to have some group discussion around how they might apply to kids that you are working with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to transition in a second into Jamboard. And the case studies are actually in Jamboard. So I know it's right here, but you're going to see it again in a second, and I'm going to read it from Jamboard. So I'm just going to do that really quickly and share so we can all see that. And so what we're going to be doing is walking through these case studies. I think some things that are important to know are that we're going to look at the case study. There are some questions that are associated with it. And we're using the Jamboard to brainstorm strategies to support this student. Now, these could be strategies that we just talked about. They could be strategies, right, that are not just what we talked about, that are things that you're using in your own practice or that you've seen others use. We are saving the Jamboard content. And so really we want this to be useful to you as a tool, again, to walk away with, like, what are some things that I could do in these specific situations? If you haven't used Jamboard before, the way that you use it is you are able to essentially take a sticky note. If you click on the left-hand side, the sticky note function, you can then write a response in the sticky note, and I'll be kind of organizing the sticky notes to kind of to kind of group them into general strategy areas. So without further ado, the goal is to actually do 2 case studies today. If you were here 2 weeks ago, we did 1 case study, but I think I am super cognizant that what it looks like to support students with executive function differences varies greatly when the student is in elementary school versus when they're in high school. And what those challenges look like, can be quite different. So we are going to do a case study first that is more elementary school focused, and then shift to an older student who's in high school. So the case study that we're going to talk about is the same case study that was used 2 weeks ago for consistency. And so this case is about a student named William. And William is in 5th grade. William has autism and he participates in general education classrooms. He's a motivated student who does well, but he does not like group work and is quick to correct his peers if they don't follow the rules of the project. Peers are starting to make fun of him and call him the rules police. William, though, does better during individual work. However, he needs support from his teacher to get started completing activities and reminders to stay on task. Without the support, William will sit and, stare at the work, but he has a lot of trouble getting started. On the playground, some of these things also show up, right? William becomes upset or frustrated when his peers break the rules during tag or other games. And in these instances, William is quick to then kind of push peers. All right, so moving into some of the questions around this case, we're super interested first in understanding what are the main executive function differences William has, right? Like we've talked about the fact that executive function is a broad umbrella term. And in order for us to actually hone in on what strategies we're going to use, we first have to know exactly what it is we want to support him with in the first place. And so the first question is, when you think about this case, what are the executive function differences that you would want to support William with? And you're welcome. We'll be monitoring the chat. If you're unable to pop them in Jamboard using the sticky note feature, you're also welcome to pop them in the chat box, and Kelly and Josie will be moving them into the Jamboard. Yeah, I see that. So someone wrote, okay, this is where my own executive function skills come into play. So someone wrote initiating a task and activity, right? So he's getting stuck, right? He needs some help getting rolling. Challenges with impulse control and inhibition and task initiation. So I appreciate that. So also hitting the task initiation, he needs some help getting started, and he's having trouble, right? He's getting frustrated easily and is having trouble kind of regulating himself and is quick to jump in and push other kids. Totally. So I see initiation and then kind of some regulation and inhibition goals. Anything else stand out? There's something that is super, I feel like is really kind of important that would drive how you might support William. Yeah, I see Beverly wrote regulation of his emotions. Thank you. Emotion regulation is huge. I think these two stickies here, the challenges with impulse control and emotion reg, go hand in hand. But absolutely. The other thing, emotion regulation. I see that. I was just going to write myself. I was going to do flexibility. Let's see. Put emotion regulation down here. Someone was doing it at the same time. We have shared thoughts. Yeah. So main areas and social skills. Awesome. Thank you for putting that in there. So we're going to help him with the initiating his tasks. We're going to help him with flexibility, right? What immediately stands out is that he definitely could use support, kind of being able to shift perspectives and maybe be less of a rules police. But there are also maybe some environmental changes we want to be thinking about if peers are calling him the rules police. And then emotion regulation and social skills. All right, I am cognizant of time, and so I'm going to move to probably the most important question, which is, given all of that, what are the strategies that you might use with William to support his flexibility, his initiation, his emotion regulation, and then maybe to his social skills? Okay. Oh, I love this. Okay. So many good things. Again, I'm going to do my best to group them as they come in. So for task initiation, someone says, we're going to help William essentially get ready, right? We're going to proactively support him and knowing what to do for the specific task, so it doesn't kind of take him so long to get started. I see role play. I love this. I love that people are hitting on the actual methods or tools that you would use to help him learn these strategies. So lots of role play. A big deal, little deal, and replacement behaviors. Okay. Yeah. So teaching, right, that is it a big deal or a little deal that peers are breaking the rules, right? And role playing around that, role playing what he can do when kids don't follow the rules, and supporting him and learning maybe other ways to regulate his emotions. So it does not feel good to feel frustrated. And it sounds like his go-to, right, is to push kids. And we want to teach him other ways to regulate his emotions. Absolutely. What else? What about his environment? I'm just interested to know if there are things that would be on your mind to think about with respect to the environment that he's in. Like essentially, like we're saying, like certainly we want to support his flexibility and make it easier for him to tolerate that. Oh, I love this. Smaller, yeah. Maybe we're doing smaller groups with him. Okay, I'm going to put this over here. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to put all of our role plays over here. We're going to teach him some new skills. So I love that, right? We're teaching him replacement behaviors. We have some environmental modifications using a timer to maybe help him. Maybe he has like a little bit of like planning space before he needs to start a task. First then strategies, social stories. I love that. So giving him some really nice examples of what things could look like. And I appreciate this, asking him what would help himself. Multiple social, oh wait, I think our social story got moved there. Closer seating, right? I love these. And I just appreciate this because, right, oftentimes it feels like this is all on the student, right? We want the student to conform to the environment that they're in, and that is certainly important, but there is also really important changes that can be made to the environments that we have that are not necessarily supporting our neurodiverse students. And I think a little bit about his peers, right? Like, what is the culture of our classroom if peers are indeed calling him a rules police? Like, what's going on? That does not feel good, right? And, you know, we want to make sure that he's in an environment where, like, you know, where he's not being always shamed for those things. This is amazing. Ah, thank you. The blue sticky note says whole class lessons on name calling. Right. How can we support students in being more tolerant of neurodiverse learning styles? We all get stuck and rigid, right? Like there's a good chance that all of those students at one point have. And so we need to create a culture where, you know, some of that is not so shamed. Okay. These are amazing. So I did put like, as you can see, like I tried to group a lot of these environmental strategies together. And we will get these organized here. Lunch bunch with peers. But again, we want to get those environmental supports in place, and then we want to also support William and maybe some of his other peers too in learning how to be more flexible, how to kind of manage and cope when rules or expectations are broken. And that is going to be so important. Okay, I'm going to try and clean these up before they get sent around to everyone. But again, I really appreciate those ideas for how we can support him. I am cognizant of our time, so I'm actually going to move to our second case because in our webinar 2 weeks ago, we only talked about William and a fifth grader, and I just want to make sure we have the opportunity to talk about a student who's in high school, because I think that there are just different things to be thinking about. So this student, her name is Sarah, and she's in the 10th grade and has an IEP with an autism designation. Sarah has borderline cognitive skills and is learning at about a 5th grade level. She has a few friends, but is often observed to interrupt them, maybe say things that appear off topic, or talks more persistently about fashion design. Sarah is sensitive to loud noises, including fire drills, the intercom, and loud laughter. She is often late to class, loses her belongings, and or forgets to complete and turn in assignments. She's easily annoyed and upset when she is reprimanded or learns of her forgetfulness. In these situations, she puts her head on the desk, cries, or tries to walk out of the classroom. Her teachers are wondering whether she may have executive functioning differences and what they can be doing to support her. So there's a lot to unpack. To me, this feels like a really common thing that we might see, which is that like oftentimes it's not just one executive function challenge, right? We're seeing kids who, right, are struggling in kind of multiple areas, and it's manifesting and making it hard and making them also have a hard time regulating their emotions. Awesome. So I think, again, the first question before we move into strategies, if we could just briefly put down, like, in your mind, what are the main executive function domains that you want to support Sarah with? And then we'll move into the specific activities that you might do with her to support those skills. Yeah. Amazing. Emotion regulation feels huge. And flexibility as well. I know those two are grouped together, but I agree. Time management. Yeah. There's so much more to manage when you're in high school, right? Like you have to change classes, there's work. Like it's just like the executive function demands are way higher than when you were in 5th grade. Oh, I love it. Sensory issues. Yeah. Helping her. Beautiful. Okay. All right. I'm putting the planning down with time management. I'm putting the sensitivity to sound with our sensory differences. And then I'm putting our impulse control over here. Social skills. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like maybe she's having a hard time figuring out what the best way is to connect with her peers. So we may want to do that. Social skills. Awesome. So I have our sensory issues, our sensory differences. We have kind of our planning, organization types of strategies. We have emotion regulation, which probably would mean kind of identifying what some of those triggers are. We have impulse control, flexibility, and social skills. That's a whole lot. Holy cow. So I think the question for everyone is, where do you start, right? You know, for students who are having a hard time, what are some strategies that you have found to be useful that could be used like as a front line to really help her? All right. Yeah, I love that this person in the pink is already hitting on environmental changes that are going to support Sarah. So allowing students to wear headphones, sitting in a quieter area. That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. Modifications to support her in making transitions during times where there's less of a sensory overload. I love that. So again, that's kind of a nice environmental modification that's just going to make the environment more conducive for Sarah. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so we have modeling, stretch breaks. I love this. Brain breaks. Okay, provide student with a planner. Amazing. So getting at that planning, what are the visual supports that we can use that help Sarah break down some of those strategies? Again, checklist of what she needs. I love all these references to visual supports for planning. Oh, another one. I love using technology for that. Okay. This is beautiful. I'm putting all of our planning and planning related activities and supports over here. And sensory strategies. Let's see. I'm going to put these over here because they are environmental modifications to support her sensory differences. Beautiful. Emotion regulation. Yeah, we really like for adolescents, this is a tough time for lots of kids. And so we really want to be supporting Sarah and understanding how she can really regulate her emotions, and especially in kind of these different situations. All right, I put all of our role play modeling kind of social story teaching methods here. I'm just kind of grouping things as I go. Lessons on emotion regulation and yeah. I love the emphasis there on catastrophizing. And so that to me hits on those cognitive strategies, which is, right, how do we, help students learn and use those rote kind of phrases that we all use to get through tough situations, which is like, it's no big deal. I can handle it. It's going to be okay. It's going to be over soon. And we want to kind of help her learn and use those things. Amazing. We have our specialized academic instruction. Okay, moving our social skills over here. Beautiful. I love the double check and pack the backpack at night. And I think it speaks to the importance, right, that not everything is going to happen in the school environment, right? Like we need to be thinking about what are the things that are going to set students up for success before they even show up at school. So a planner is definitely one of those. We want Sarah to have that visual support, but maybe there are some other visuals that can be used at home that are going to help her remind her to do a check and see kind of, does she have all of her belongings? Or maybe that's on her phone, like someone mentioned. And so she's just using an app or something else to kind of make sure she goes through and has what she needs. I love that this gets at role play and that practice. Amazing. And I group stretch breaks and brain breaks kind of together. They're both strategies that to me feel like both environmental modifications, not even modifications. I feel like, I don't know, lots of classrooms and different spaces have these things, but they're intentionally put in place to help kids kind of regulate and feel good. And so to me, they go hand in hand. We're maybe not like teaching kids specifically about skills within these breaks, but the breaks are in place to allow them to use skills that they have learned, and that can be really important. This is fantastic. I really appreciate the automatic kind of emphasis on environmental supports, planning tools. And what I see here is that, there's lots of available resources and apps that can help students hone in on some of those skills. And we all rely on those things, right? I'm sure many of us have running lists on our phones, right? Or a calendar app that we rely on extensively to even know when to show up at things. So I think it's also leaning into the fact that, we all use these things and we use them for a reason, because there's a lot to keep on top of, and it gets harder and harder as we get older. The expectations for executive function get higher and higher. All right, I'm just doing a little time check. We do have a couple minutes just to kind of really briefly hit this question, and then we'll be moving back to do an important debrief. But I love that someone is already anticipating the question, which is that, right, there's a whole lot of other things that you're probably like, well, like how I support Sarah is probably going to depend on this thing. And so I think that folks have already hit on some things that are important, which is, we want to understand developmentally kind of how she is learning. And that we want to make sure that like the teaching that we're doing is really tailored to her developmental skills, her interests. We want to do that. Like we've talked a lot about buy-in. Like, I think sometimes we just assume that kids should be intrinsically motivated to learn these things. And that's just like not the case. It's not the case for anyone. So we want to think through, what are her interests? How can we get her buy-in to do these things? I love these emphases on translation. So right, we want to be thinking about our home life. Is she getting other supports in the community that are going to help her translate these skills? And I love this comment, like, are we teaching skills that are going to transition with her out of high school, right? We want to be thinking about tools that are not specific to the school, but that can be used in other places. Amazing. So we want to, again, include parents and incorporate those interests. Those are really important suggestions. Which can be hard. I think, depending on the setting that you're in, incorporating caregivers and bringing on families and making the bridge and links to other services is not always the most straightforward. All right, I am going to transition back, and I just want to give the plug. I know that Kelly mentioned this at the start of the webinar. There is an evaluation survey that we use that's really helpful, and it's for us to understand to get feedback on the content of these webinars. We are cognizant, right, that there are lots of different ways to learn about mental health strategies, that it's a complicated topic, and that there are, we want to be intentional about how we structure the content of the webinars that we're putting together. So just to wrap up, I want to give a plug again that this webinar is part of a larger mental health toolkit. Some of the strategies that we talked about today, including some of the ones related to emotion regulation, are touched upon in other materials. So feel free to check those out. Whoops, I accidentally clicked on a link and then I got kicked out. Just let me know, Kelly, if I lost my slides. But we also have shared some additional resources. So we have links to institutions and places that push out resources related to mental health and mental health supports for autistic students. The strategies that I talked about today, a lot of them are pulled from this Unstuck and On Target program. And so I did put the link to that program here in case you're interested in checking it out. I have found it to have really useful terminology and activities to teach some of these complicated strategies. And then just a reminder that we do have a link to give an evaluation for the content of this webinar. So we really appreciate you doing that, and we'll be able to get a certificate of attendance. We want to end today, in addition to completing the evaluation feedback by just asking, and we do compile the results from our polls to inform the content that we put together for these webinars. We want to know what are the mental health topics that you would like more information on and how you want to learn about these things. We're going to, again, use kind of this information to really tailor some of the content that we put together in the spring. We also recognize that the poll is close-ended. And so if there are things that are not represented in this poll that you think are important to know, please feel free to drop them in the chat box or use the evaluation survey to give us feedback on things that we're not considering. I really appreciate this. Thank you for filling it out. It looks like some really big topics are emotion regulation, anxiety. Amazing. So you can just see some of the responses there. And then people appreciate webinars and recorded presentations. Again, I think we are open to feedback, so please feel free to use the evaluation to let us know. And I'm just checking the chat box to make sure.
Catherine, there was one question a little while back from Coulter. What is the best option for nonverbal clients that are not responding to ABA?
Oh, goodness, that is such a good question. I feel like I probably would want to know a little bit more information about that, but I think for kids who are not using spoken communication, who are not using spoken communication, we want to be super intentional about how we're teaching them. And what we're teaching them and how we're teaching them. My experience is that not all ABA providers are versed in mental health, right? And so I would be thinking about, okay, how can we make sure that there is an emphasis on mental health and not just behavior, right? Oftentimes we see that behavior is the external representation of, right, all sorts of things, whether that be communication challenges, right, or sometimes mental health challenges. And so I would be thinking about why are they not responding? Is it because we're not teaching them in a way that is conducive to their learning style? Do we need to use more visual supports, have more repetition? Are they not responding because we're actually not supporting them in the skill area that they need, right? And maybe because we're not focusing on mental health when that's kind of the underlying cause of what's going on. So I think, I would be thinking about where is that breakdown and why is it happening? The answer to that question is going to help you think through what the change needs to be, whether it's a change in actually how you're teaching or a change in what you're teaching. Thanks so much for sharing that question, Kelly. And it's a really, really good question. Coulter, I appreciate it. And I'm happy. I think my email may be in one of the slides, so you're always welcome to send a follow-up email. And I'm happy to troubleshoot that.